Hello, welcome to my video on exercise 3 for the Database Management Systems class. Today we'll be covering the select statements like we did in the previous video, but this time we'll be rendering onto a server client Node.js and React system. So let's just get right into it. I have the code set up here following the tutorial previously, and right now we have the React over here. And we also have the backend Node.js in the server.js over here. So just to show you how it runs, let's just start up our server and client, and we'll go from there. So I'll cd from the parent directory of exercise 3 into my backend, and then I'll do the npm start. Now you can see the server has started and is connected to the database. Now we go into the front end through a new terminal, and we do our npm run dev. Click on this link, and this is what our web page looks like. So here is all the select statements that I have listed throughout here, nice and ordered in their own respective tables. I will be covering the SQL statements in detail, but this is what it looks like. It goes sequentially from 1 to 10, and I'm basing off my tables of restaurants, so how a restaurant will typically run. And I did Olive Garden in this case because that's where I work at. Just made the most sense to me. So, moving on from there, let's now start talking about the code. In the server.js, we have our package requirements that we need to run the web page. So, Express is a good way to set up a framework for the Node.js, simplifying the routing and handling all the HTTP requests and RESTful APIs. We have the MySQL, of course, to handle the database and interacts with it directly. We have the cores, which enables resource sharing, allowing my server to handle different requests from different origins. And then we have to create instances of either of them, the Express and the cores. From there, we create the connection to the database. We're using a local host to the root, and I'm selecting database exercise 3. So if you remember from the last video, when we went into exam, the server, this is exactly how we're interacting with it. Just like this could be our user's interface, but we're interacting it through a different interface through the Node.js. So I've already made a database called exercise 3, and I already have inputted all of my tables in there, ranging from customers to inventory to tables themselves. And each one of them has at least 10 instances of data, and we'll be using these to interact with each other to create select statements, at least 10 of them. Okay. Actually, let's go back to the code. Let's just finish this one over here. Now, once we have defined the database, now we want to connect to it, and we're using error handling to connect with it. Checking that if there is an error, that we will get a database connection failed plus the reason of the error. Otherwise, we will get a success message saying that we have connected the database successfully. If you looked in our previous messages, that we do have that, and we are actually successfully connected the database. From there on, we have all our routes that we will be using to connect to the front end of this project. So as you can see, let's just go over one of them because these are cookie cutter code and that we just continued using. So app.get means that through an Express framework, we are actually receiving something back from the database. So we want to return the data through this route. The route name is select statement 1, and then the request and response objects, indicating that the request is going inward while the response is coming outwards from the server. And then inside is directing to a function in which we have our statement making the select statement. So like we covered before, the select statement is selecting the two columns called employee name and shift role, and then from the employees and shifts respectively. So these are columns coming from the tables employees and shifts, where the employees.employee ID is equal to shifts employee underscore ID. So these two have to be the same, and the shift date is equal to this specific date, September 24th. So we have two conditions in which the exercise now requires us to be able to get this to work. So the select, we should get two columns that follows these two conditions from their respective tables to break it down. And from there, we have to query this into the database. So now we db.query the statement, and we have an error object, and then we have the data object in which we are returning. Again, we do our error handling, that if there is an error, that we return a response of the error. Otherwise, return the data into a JSON format that we can actually use in the front end. So that pretty much sums it up and how the RESTful API that we use works. And from here on out, we're actually using the same one 10 times, but we're just changing up the statement for a different statement because we have 10 different statements total. So I indicated here inside of its route name 1 through 10. And they all have their own different tables and own different combinations of how they did it. So, and finally, we also have the app.listen, listening at the port 8081. This is where the web server is listening on, and we are even counting log that I am listening, indicating that the server is up and running. So that covers the server.js. Now we go into the front end, into our app.jsx. We are using a React framework, so we have to import the React library, as well as some other sub features such as use effect and use state that we will cover shortly. And we're also having a style sheet that we're using to make it nice and pretty. From there, the React framework has a function called app that we're calling, and we're defining it through here in these brackets that goes all the way down here, and we are just exporting default app so it can be used in other files. Let's start from the beginning from this. So we are indicating 10 use states, means it's a React way of calling a state variable. So each has its own data and function set data to update the state, and we can use this anytime throughout this file. But now we have 10 of them, indicating we have one for each select statement, which makes sense. Each data does not want to be, data from the respective statements does not want to be interfering with each other, overriding it. It will just be a mess. So the simplest way will just go to be one for one. And from there, we have the use effect, which is another React function which allows us to call this fetch statements upon opening up this web page. So it actually responds to the user whenever it reloads the page to instinctively call this fetch statements. And we have 10 of them in total. Again, one for each respective select statement. So we do a fetch call to each of these statements, 1, and then from there we do 2, 3, and so on, all the way to 10 in that exact order. And then we are actually we are actually getting the response from the response.json, like we mentioned earlier, and that is reformed to the data 1, 2, 3, 4 in the respective order, again, to the set data part of the use states that we hear to set our data to be updated to that new received data. And then otherwise, if it all fails, we have a catch to get the error, and we'll be printing it out into the console. Okay, so from there on, this is how the routes, this is how we are catching it. So when we reload the page, when we load the page at all, it'll actually update it all 10 times. So if I click Open DevTools, and if I reload it, actually, oh, it's because we have to set data. But if I were to set one of them to console, just to give you an indication of what's happening. Okay, you know what? That's fine. But it does work like that. It is capturing the data, as you can see over here. Otherwise, this would not be printing, but this works. Um, from there, we are actually part of the React framework. We are now displaying it. So we want to render all of this through this HTML system that we have here. We have, in their own respective rows, we have the select statements 1, 2, and 3 to indicate which one's which. And then we're showing it into a table form because these are tables themselves, and it would just be the best way to show them. So I've hard coded the table columns of what to expect from here. So the data is giving out, we are mapping out the data through its data and index. So for every data in there is a in the JSON format, it's an object, so we can call it from its object name, so employee name, and then we shift row, and inside of there will be the data itself containing into it. And you can see we have for every single one, they're slightly different because they're different combinations. Some of those over here, we have the slice over here because the dates, data types inside from the JSON from the SQL to the JSON format is a little messy. So we just splice it to the first 10 characters just to show the dates here. And that is pretty much how this works with the server client, and this just renders onto it through the React framework. Now let's just go over the SQL code. So like I mentioned before, I plugged in all the SQL into this example over here. I did it through this SQL browser. This queries up in here in this, and then we just made our tables and we insert every single one. I even have the text file to show all of the statements that I've created to get to this far. Okay, and let's just go over the select statements, shall we? So the select statements that we're using, we'll go back to the server.js. So we're selecting. We already covered one, but two would be the orders.order.id and employees.employee name from the orders and employees tables, and then we are doing the conditionals where they have to be the same, the server ID and the employee ID, and that the total amount of the order is greater than 100, and the employee name is Allison Johnson. We have menu items and item name, and ordered items.quantity. So these are two columns for it has to be from the menu items and order items tables, and three conditionals where the menu items ID and the order item ID has to be the same, and the order item ID is 1, and the item price is greater than 10. And each of single one of these are grabbing at least two columns and are using two conditionals to run, like the exercise was requesting for. And that pretty much covers it. All right. So this is one final look at our statements, the result of it. See, it nicely puts it into its respective tables, 1 to 10. And like we mentioned before, there's a one where it was asking for Alice Johnson as the employee name, and we only received employee names with Alice Johnson and their order IDs, like the selective, like the selection statements we're asking for. And that will be all. Thank you again for listening to my video. You have a great day.